In a world where freedom is promised but justice remains conditional, the quiet moments of everyday life can explode into a public reckoning. This is the story of Malcolm Reed, an ordinary black man who made an ordinary purchase only to find himself branded a criminal. It's not a tale set in history books or distant places. It's now. It's here. It's the uneasy truth behind a trip to the store, a receipt ignored, and assumptions that escalate into shackles. What began as a misunderstanding became a courtroom battle, won not only for innocence, but for dignity. Alongside him stands a justice system, flawed, tangled, and exposed. A white prosecutor blinded by bias. A black judge wrestling with legacy. A community watching, waiting, hoping. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, sterile and bright, casting long shadows between the aisles of the Evergreen Market in downtown Atlanta. The air smelled of disinfectant and refrigerated produce, and a distant voice droned overhead through the speakers, announcing a discount on paper towels. For most shoppers, it was just another Tuesday. For Malcolm Reed, it had been a long day. His back ached from the 12-hour shift at the warehouse, and his hands, rough and calloused from lifting pallets, still bore the sting of a paper cut from earlier that morning. He wasn't dressed to impress: worn jeans, a clean gray hoodie, and a pair of old running shoes. Just enough to be comfortable. His only stop tonight was to grab a few essentials: detergent, milk, and a pack of batteries. He liked self-checkout. No small talk. No judgment. Just scan, pay, and leave. It gave him control in a world that so often denied it. Malcolm approached the self-checkout machine. The blinking screen welcomed him silently. He scanned each item carefully, one by one, then slid his debit card through the reader. A soft beep confirmed the payment. He took his receipt, tucked it into his wallet, and packed his items into a paper bag. As he stepped away from the checkout lane, a voice stopped him cold. "Sir." "Excuse me." It was sharp, authoritative. Not a request, an accusation disguised as politeness. Two store security guards blocked his path. One of them was already speaking into a walkie-talkie. The other, a young man with a buzz cut and narrowed eyes, stared at Malcolm like he was calculating his threat level. "We need you to step aside for a moment," the buzzcut guard said. Malcolm blinked, confused. "Is there a problem?" "Just a routine check," the other guard said, less than convincingly. "We've had some incidents." "I paid," Malcolm replied, calmly. "You can check the cameras. I have the receipt right here." He reached for his wallet. But by then, a manager had appeared, and behind him, a police officer who must have already been in the store. "No need to get defensive," the manager said, crossing his arms. He didn't look at Malcolm so much as through him. "We got an alert about a suspicious transaction on that self-checkout machine." Malcolm furrowed his brow. "What are you talking about?" "I paid. I have proof." The police officer stepped forward. "Let's not escalate this. If you have the receipt, we'll take a look at it." Malcolm pulled the small white slip from his wallet and handed it over. The officer glanced at it, barely reading the text, before shaking his head and handing it to the manager. "This could be fake," the manager muttered. "Fake?" Malcolm said, incredulous. "You think I printed it myself?" "We've seen forged receipts before," the manager replied. "They're easy to make. Especially if you know what you're doing." "I'm a warehouse worker, not a hacker," Malcolm said, voice rising. "Check your cameras." But no one moved. The guards stood silently, unmoving. The manager looked away, uninterested. The police officer reached for his cuffs. "You're under investigation for suspected theft and fraud," he said flatly. Malcolm's heart dropped. "What? You're arresting me?" "You'll have your chance to explain it at the station," the officer replied, spinning Malcolm around. Cold steel wrapped around his wrists. People stared. Some with curiosity, others with silent judgment. A woman whispered something to her child, pulling them closer. Someone lifted a phone, filming. Malcolm's receipt fluttered to the floor, forgotten. Later that night, In the booking room, Malcolm sat under harsh lighting, his hoodie removed, his fingerprints taken. He wasn't crying. He wouldn't give them that. But his jaw clenched, and he stared blankly at the wall ahead, watching the paint chip. He had never been in trouble before. No record. No priors. Never even had a parking ticket. A door opened. A tall man in a navy blue suit entered, holding a file in one hand and an air of self-righteous certainty in the other. "I'm William Dunham," he said without offering his hand. "Assistant District Attorney." Malcolm said nothing. "You've been charged with petty theft and suspected fraud." That receipt, he tapped the folder, was found to be suspicious. "How?" "It came from your machine," Malcolm said. Dunham smiled coldly. "That's what we'll sort out in court. In the meantime, you'll be held until arraignment." "But I didn't do anything." "Sure," Dunham said. "That's what they all say." He turned on his heel and left. Across town. In his office on the third floor of the Fulton County Courthouse, Judge Harold Jennings rubbed his temples. A lifelong Atlanta resident, and one of the first black men to ever wear the judicial robe in this district, he had seen this story too many times. Too many men like Malcolm profiled, arrested, and processed through a system that rarely asked questions unless it was too late. He looked down at the preliminary case file dropped on his desk, State of Georgia versus Malcolm J. Reed. He read the notes. Suspicious behavior at self-checkout. No surveillance footage yet submitted. No witness statements. Just an accusation and a man who had the audacity to shop while black. He sighed. Here we go again. The early morning light barely pierced through the thick clouds over downtown Atlanta. Rain tapped gently against the courthouse windows, rhythmic and cold. Inside Courtroom 3B, the air was dense with tension, as if the old wooden benches had absorbed decades of injustice. William Dunham sat confidently at the prosecutor's table, wearing a crisp gray suit, his tie a perfect Windsor knot. He'd been in court hundreds of times. Prosecuting was his art, his pride. But unlike most lawyers who clung to facts and precedent, William thrived on narratives. And this morning, he was ready to perform. He didn't see Malcolm Reed as a person. He saw a symbol. To Dunham, Malcolm was just another suspect in a long line of troublemakers who made his city unsafe. No matter what Malcolm had done or not done, Dunham had already written the ending. He would be found guilty. He would be punished. The bailiff called, "All rise." Judge Harold Jennings entered, his face calm but firm, eyes scanning the room. When they landed on Malcolm, something flickered behind his expression. He could already tell this case would be one of those cases. "Be seated," Judge Jennings said, his voice low and commanding. Malcolm sat at the defense table, next to a public defender he'd met just an hour ago, Susan Torres, a young, overworked attorney carrying 2 briefcases and a thermos of lukewarm coffee. She gave Malcolm a reassuring nod, but he could tell she was treading water like everyone else in this system. The charges. Dunham stood, unrolling his first accusation with the poise of a seasoned actor. "Your Honor, the defendant, Malcolm Reed, was apprehended last Tuesday at Evergreen Market, attempting to pass off a forged receipt for goods he did not pay for. Surveillance shows no valid transaction matching the items he took. Additionally, the store's systems flagged the barcode as manipulated." He let that sink in, letting the courtroom imagine a mastermind hacker, not a tired warehouse worker trying to buy detergent. Torres stood. "Your Honor, the defense contends that Mr. Reed used a standard debit card at the self-checkout, received a valid receipt from the machine, and never attempted to deceive anyone. We request access to all surveillance footage and digital records of the transaction." Judge Jennings nodded slowly. Motion noted. "Mr. Dunham, do you have the video evidence available?" Dunham's lips tightened. "It's being processed, Your Honor." "Then I expect it in my chambers by tomorrow." "No trial will proceed without it. We don't convict based on speculation." Malcolm allowed himself a tiny breath of relief. A whisper from the past. Later, in his chambers, Judge Jennings sat alone with the case file. He flipped through it mechanically until his eyes landed on a faded photograph tucked into the back, Malcolm's ID photo, stapled carelessly. It struck him. The look in Malcolm's eyes. It was the same look Jennings had seen in the mirror 40 years ago, after being wrongly accused of cheating on his college entrance exam by a white professor who refused to believe a black kid could score so high. That day had burned into him. And though he'd proven his innocence, he never forgot how powerless he felt when no one believed him. Until another professor, an older black man, stood up for him and forced the university to reconsider. History had come full circle. Outside the courtroom, Malcolm sat alone in the hallway, waiting for paperwork. Torres had gone to fetch something, and he used the moment to think. This wasn't just a mistake, it was humiliation. Being arrested like that, in front of strangers. No apology from the store. No explanation. Just handcuffs and headlines. He hadn't told his mother yet. She was already struggling with diabetes and mounting bills. He didn't want to be another weight on her back. A man walked by, pausing. "You the guy from the news?" he asked, not unkindly. Malcolm nodded warily. "Don't let them break you, brother," the man said. "They always come for us first." The prosecutor's truth. That night, William Dunham sat at home in his tastefully modern kitchen, glass of bourbon in hand. A fireplace flickered. Jazz played faintly from a speaker. His wife, Carolyn, stepped in. "You working on the Reed case?" Dunham nodded. "Should be simple. Open and shut." She hesitated. "You ever wonder if maybe some of these guys didn't do what you think they did?" He looked up, a touch of anger in his eyes. "They're all the same. You let your guard down, and they'll take advantage. You don't understand how bad it gets on the streets." Carolyn pursed her lips. "No. I suppose I don't. But I do know that being black in this country doesn't make someone guilty." He didn't respond. He just took another sip of bourbon and turned up the music. An uneasy night. Malcolm lay awake on his mattress, staring at the ceiling in his one-bedroom apartment. His place was modest, clean, and quiet, just how he liked it. But tonight, he felt a weight pressing on his chest. He kept replaying it in his head, how they looked at him. Like he was less than human. He opened his wallet and pulled out the crumpled receipt they'd finally returned to him. It was faded now, but the timestamp still read clear. Paid, $14.27, 6:43 p.m. That was the truth. He just hoped it would be enough. The rain stopped by morning, leaving a cool haze over Atlanta's skyline. Dew clung to the courthouse windows like the story trying to break through the silence. Inside courtroom 3B, anticipation pulsed like static before a storm. Today was the pretrial hearing, where the prosecution would present their foundation for pressing formal charges, and the defense could contest it. But today, something else simmered beneath the surface: truth, still unseen, and bias, now on full display. A system already decided. William Dunham rose with an air of smug certainty. "Your Honor," he began, "we submit that the evidence points not only to theft, but to intentional deception. The manipulated receipt, combined with an inconsistent self-checkout scan log, suggests the defendant attempted to fraudulently pass stolen merchandise." Judge Jennings narrowed his eyes. "You still haven't provided the surveillance footage. Why is that?" "We've requested it from Evergreen's corporate office," Dunham said. "They've experienced technical delays." "That was 3 days ago," Jennings interrupted. "You're proceeding with felony charges and no primary evidence?" Dunham hesitated, then pushed forward. "I don't need to remind the court how often criminals use technology to manipulate retail systems. This wasn't an innocent mistake. It was calculated. It follows a pattern." Malcolm's head shot up. "A pattern," he said, before Susan gently tugged his sleeve to quiet him. Dunham continued, "This isn't the first time we've seen fake receipts used to steal goods. Especially in high-theft areas. That was it. The dog whistle. The unspoken reference, his neighborhood, his skin, his presumed criminality. The judge's memory. As the courtroom grew tense, Judge Jennings leaned back, his fingers steepled under his chin. He remembered the time, decades ago, when he tried to buy a pair of running shoes after passing the bar exam. The cashier watched him the entire time, and when he walked out, someone followed him to the sidewalk, demanding to verify the receipt. He'd shown it, but they didn't look. They just snatched the bag from his hand. "It's company policy," they said. Back then, he'd let it go. This time, he wouldn't. Defense strikes back. Susan Torres stood, brushing her notes aside. "Your Honor, we move for dismissal on the grounds of lack of evidence. No surveillance video has been produced, no credible witness statements, and no proof that the receipt was forged. Mr. Reed used a debit card, his personal card, which has already been verified by the bank as a successful transaction at the precise time in question." She turned toward Malcolm. "Mr. Reed is a working-class citizen, employed full-time, with no criminal record. He's not a career thief. He's a man who bought laundry detergent and milk and got arrested because someone assumed he couldn't be trusted." Her voice cracked just slightly. Jennings watched the young lawyer with a quiet respect. She was trying. Really trying. Dunham scoffed. "That's a convenient story. But I've seen how fast these people adapt. A clean record doesn't erase potential guilt." Jennings' voice cut through the room like thunder. "These people, counselor?" Dunham blinked. "I meant career offenders. Habitual shoplifters. That sort of thing." "No," Jennings said, voice icy. "You said these people. Choose your words carefully in this courtroom." The silence that followed was deafening. A revelation. Later that afternoon, Susan returned from a meeting with Evergreen's legal team. She found Malcolm in the holding area, waiting for her with tired eyes. "They finally released the footage," she said. His heart skipped. "And?" She pulled out a tablet and pressed play. There he was. Clear as day. Scanning each item. Holding up the receipt. Walking calmly toward the exit. Every movement was clean. Honest. Malcolm leaned forward. "They're still going to charge me, aren't they?" Susan looked down. "They shouldn't. But Dunham's digging in. He's pushing for a full trial." "Why?" She paused. "Because you're not the kind of person he thinks deserves the benefit of the doubt." The conversation. That night, Judge Jennings sat in his office, still reviewing the footage that had just landed on his desk. As he watched Malcolm scan the items one by one, a knot formed in his stomach, not from doubt, but from the clarity of it all. There was no fraud. No manipulation. Just a man buying groceries, treated like a criminal. He turned to his clerk. "What do you think?" The clerk, a young black law student named Andre Wallace, shook his head. "I think. I've seen this before. With my brother. He got stopped coming out of a store in Buckhead for having too many shopping bags. They made him empty everything on the sidewalk." Jennings sighed. Same script. Different cast. Back at the prosecution's office. Dunham sat at his desk late into the night, re-watching the footage again and again. He couldn't find a single sign of guilt. No skipped scans. No sleight of hand. Yet something inside him wouldn't let it go. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was something darker. He turned off the video. Then deleted it from his drive. He told himself, the defense has it now. It's out there. It won't matter if I drop it on my end. But he knew better. He had made a choice. The courtroom was packed. Word of Malcolm Reed's case had spread thanks to social media, local journalists, and whispers of injustice that always move faster than official news. By 9 a.m., a crowd gathered on the courthouse steps holding hand-painted signs, "Being black isn't a crime, justice for Malcolm, and innocent until proven black?" Inside, Malcolm sat beside his attorney, Susan Torres, in a freshly ironed shirt and a tie borrowed from his neighbor. His mother sat 2 rows behind him, her hands trembling in prayer. She hadn't cried in front of him, but her eyes carried the weight of 100 prayers unanswered. Across from him, William Dunham sat cold and unreadable. But inside, something was shifting. He couldn't shake the clarity of the video footage, the truth he'd seen and chosen to ignore. Still, his instincts refused to let go. This wasn't about facts anymore. It was about control. Opening arguments. Dunham rose first. His voice was calm but stern, the way prosecutors are trained to sound when painting a man guilty before the first witness speaks. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "this is a case of deception, a carefully crafted scheme to exploit technology and escape with stolen goods. The defense will tell you this was a mistake. But make no mistake, this wasn't just poor judgment. It was theft." He let that word linger. He didn't need to shout it. Just say it enough times to plant the seed. Then Susan stood. No theatrics, no projection, just the quiet conviction of someone telling the truth. Malcolm Reed paid for his items. You will see the receipt. You will see the video. You will hear the truth. The only thing he's guilty of is shopping while black. A hush fell over the courtroom. The witnesses. The prosecution's first witness was Brian Kessler, the Evergreen store manager. He wore a navy vest, a clipped name tag, and the expression of someone who wanted to be anywhere else. Dunham guided him. "Mr. Kessler, can you describe the circumstances of Mr. Reed's arrest?" "He came through the self-checkout around 6:40 p.m. The system flagged the transaction as irregular. So we stopped him." "What was irregular?" "There was a glitch with the barcode log. The system didn't register all items scanned." Susan stood. "Mr. Kessler, was the system functioning correctly that day?" Well, we'd had some issues. A few system restarts. But the alert went off, so, without verifying surveillance or speaking with Mr. Reed, you called the police?" "I followed protocol." "Is your protocol to assume every alert means a black customer is stealing?" "Objection," Dunham barked. "Sustained," Judge Jennings said, though his eyes met Susan's with a hint of agreement. The next witness was Officer Lane, the arresting officer. Calm, clinical, and confident. Dunham asked, "Did you observe any suspicious behavior?" "Yes, sir." He became defensive. "Did he attempt to flee?" "No." "Did he cooperate?" "Yes." "But he raised his voice?" "Yes." Susan stepped up. "Officer Lane, would you say raising your voice when falsely accused is abnormal?" "No, ma'am." "Did Mr. Reed threaten you or anyone else?" "No." "So the entire basis for the arrest was the store's request?" "That's correct." The turning point. Now came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Susan brought out a flash drive. "We'd like to submit Exhibit C, security footage from Evergreen Market, showing the full transaction." Judge Jennings nodded. "Proceed." The courtroom dimmed slightly as the screen lit up. There Malcolm was, scanning detergent, milk, a candy bar, batteries. He placed each one in the bagging area, glanced at the screen, and paid. The timestamp matched the receipt. He even waited for the printer to finish. It was flawless. Honest. The room fell silent. Dunham didn't object. Because there was nothing to say. A quiet rebellion. During recess, Dunham stood alone in the hallway, staring at the marble floor beneath his polished shoes. For a brief moment, he wasn't the prosecutor. He was just a man confronting the ugly machinery he'd helped operate. A voice startled him. "You still gonna try and bury him?" It was Judge Jennings, arms crossed, quiet but firm. Dunham replied without turning. "I have to follow through." "No," Jennings said. "You chose to follow through. You chose not to drop the charges when the evidence cleared him." Dunham exhaled. "If I admit I was wrong, it discredits my office." "No. It restores its integrity." They locked eyes. For a second, Dunham saw not a judge, but a man who had been on both sides of this country's justice system. He looked away. Malcolm takes the stand. Back in the courtroom, it was Malcolm's turn. He sat with his hands folded, back straight, eyes fixed on the jury. His voice was low but clear. I worked 12 hours that day. My body hurt. I just wanted to get home and do my laundry. He paused. They didn't ask me any questions. They didn't listen. I had the receipt in my hand, but by then, I could already tell they didn't want to hear it. They'd made up their minds. Susan nodded, encouraging him. I wasn't angry because they thought I stole. I was angry because no matter what I said, they didn't believe me. And I realized it had nothing to do with what I did. It had everything to do with what I look like. The cross-examination. Dunham rose slowly. For the first time in the trial, he looked unsure. Mr. Reed, he began. Is it possible the system malfunctioned and missed an item? It's possible, Malcolm said. Then wouldn't you understand why store security? I understand why they might check. What I don't understand is why they didn't listen. Why they called the police before even looking. Dunham opened his mouth, then closed it. He turned to sit down. The sun had barely risen the next morning, but a crowd had already formed around the courthouse steps. The trial of Malcolm Reed had captured more than attention, it had ignited a conversation. Not just about a mistaken arrest, but about the structure that allowed it to happen, and how often it did. Inside the courtroom, Malcolm sat perfectly still, his hands clasped in his lap, eyes forward. His mother sat behind him again, this time clutching her rosary so tightly the beads left impressions in her skin. The courtroom buzzed quietly as Judge Harold Jennings took his seat. Mr. Reed, he began, you have been charged with petty theft and attempted fraud. After reviewing the evidence, hearing witness testimony, and watching the store surveillance footage, this court is prepared to render its verdict. A heavy silence. The pause felt eternal. Even Susan Torres, normally composed and collected, found herself holding her breath. Dunham sat stone-faced, but not out of pride anymore. He was crumbling inside. Not because he thought Malcolm was guilty, he now knew he wasn't, but because this case had unraveled something inside him. Something he hadn't realized he'd built his whole career upon. Assumptions. Fear. Control. Judge Jennings looked directly at Malcolm. This court finds the defendant not guilty on all counts. A sharp gasp broke from the audience. Then quiet applause. Then cheers outside as the word spread. But Malcolm didn't smile. He exhaled. Long, deep. As if finally, the weight of every injustice he had carried his entire life had been acknowledged, not erased, but at least seen. The judge speaks. Judge Jennings didn't rise. Instead, he remained seated and spoke with the kind of quiet authority that doesn't demand respect, but earns it. This case should never have reached this courtroom, he said, scanning the faces of those in attendance. What we witnessed here was not a crime, but a consequence of assumption, bias, and a refusal to confront our own prejudices. He looked at Dunham. We in the justice system are not immune to the very flaws we are sworn to correct. And when those flaws go unchallenged, they become policy. Culture. Even tradition. He turned back to Malcolm. You were wronged. By the store. By law enforcement. And, I regret to say, by this court simply by being made to defend your existence. The courtroom was utterly still. I can't undo what happened to you. But I can say, on record, that you were failed. And I can promise, this court will do better. Outside the courtroom. The crowd roared when Malcolm stepped outside. Camera crews surged. Microphones stretched like hands begging for confession. He paused at the top of the steps, looked out at the dozens, maybe hundreds, of people gathered. Someone asked, "What do you want to say to the people?" Malcolm spoke slowly. I didn't win today. I survived. And a lot of people like me don't. A quiet ripple passed through the crowd. I'm not special. I didn't do anything except not steal. And for that, I was put in a cage. He looked down at his hands. I don't need a parade. I need people to change how they see us, how they treat us. Because next time, it might not end like this. The prosecutor's reckoning. Back in his office, William Dunham stared at the blank wall for what felt like hours. He didn't go out to meet the press. He didn't speak to reporters. He didn't even call his wife. He reviewed the footage again, Malcolm scanning, paying, walking away. Over and over. A painful loop of his failure. He thought of every case he'd prosecuted like this. Every time he'd accepted suspicion as truth. Every time he'd let fear, not fact, write his closing arguments. For the first time in 20 years, he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a resignation letter template. He wasn't ready to sign it. But he wasn't ready to keep pretending, either. A quiet dinner. That night, Malcolm sat in his mother's kitchen, the smell of okra and cornbread filling the air. Neither of them spoke much. They didn't need to. After dinner, she finally said, "You did good, baby." He looked at her. "I didn't do anything. You stayed calm. You told the truth. And you walked out of that place still standing. That's not nothing." Malcolm looked down at his hands again. "I just want to live. That's all I've ever wanted." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Then live, son. Don't let them steal that too." The community reacts. In the following days, news outlets ran headlines like, "Man acquitted after being accused of theft in self-checkout error." "Racial bias under scrutiny in high-profile trial." "Surveillance footage clears innocent man, sparks local protests." But to the people in Malcolm's neighborhood, it wasn't news. It was normal. And they were tired of it. Yet something had shifted. People had seen the system exposed, live and raw. They saw the moment where silence could have won and didn't. Young men started carrying their receipts with them like lifelines. Mothers taught their children what to say if stopped again. And a quiet but growing movement began to form. Not of protest, but of truth. 3 months had passed. The banners on the courthouse steps were long gone. News vans had moved on. Hashtags faded into the algorithm's graveyard of trending topics. But in Malcolm Reed's world, everything was different now. Not because he won a trial, but because the truth had been seen, and once seen, it couldn't be unseen. Not by the public. Not by his community. Not by himself. The mailbox. Every morning, Malcolm checked his mail with quiet suspicion now. Before the arrest, it was utility bills, grocery store flyers, the occasional birthday card. After the trial, it became something else. Letters from strangers. Some angry. Some apologetic. Some just confused. "I didn't know things like that actually happened. Why are you making this about race? You're brave." "I'm sorry. I didn't realize." He didn't reply to most. He didn't have the words for every stranger's sudden awakening. But one letter caught him off guard. "Dear Mr. Reed, I was the juror in seat number 4. I voted not guilty because I believed you. But more than that, you made me realize I've doubted people like you without ever thinking about it. You changed something in me. I don't know what to do with that yet. But I wanted you to know. Kathy M." Malcolm folded the letter gently and placed it in the top drawer of his desk. He didn't frame it. But he didn't throw it away either. The resignation. In a press conference that drew only mild attention from the press, William Dunham stepped to the podium at the district attorney's office. "I've served this city for over 20 years, he said. But I no longer believe I can do it with the integrity the role demands." He didn't mention Malcolm's name. He didn't have to. Everyone knew. As he walked off the podium, he passed a reporter who asked, "Do you regret it?" Dunham paused. No, he said. I regret that it took this long. He walked out of the building without looking back. The judge's letter. Weeks later, Judge Harold Jennings mailed a sealed letter to Malcolm, handwritten in elegant cursive. Dear Mr. Reed, I've been a judge for over 15 years. I've seen countless faces come through my courtroom. Too many of them looked like yours. Not enough walked out innocent. You reminded me why I took the bench in the first place. To do justice. Not just law. Please know that you changed something, not just in me, but in the system. A small shift, maybe. But shifts become tides. And tides shape shores. Sincerely, Honorable Harold Jennings. Malcolm stared at the letter for a long time. Then placed it beside the one from the juror in seat number 4. Back to the store. One evening, just before sunset, Malcolm returned to Evergreen Market. Not to shop. Just to be there. To stand in the place where it started. The self-checkout machines buzzed quietly. New signage hung above them now. We listen. We respect. We review. He wasn't sure if it meant anything. Or if it was just PR. But the store manager, Brian Kessler, saw him and walked over. Mr. Reed, he said, awkward. Nervous. Malcolm turned slowly. Yes? I just wanted to say. I'm sorry. I handled it wrong. Malcolm waited. Not angry. Just waiting. Kessler added, we've changed a few things. More review before calling the police. More training. Doesn't fix what happened to you. But it's something. Malcolm nodded once. Then turned and walked out without buying a thing. Sometimes, dignity is payment enough. A voice in the room. A month later, Malcolm was invited to speak at a community justice forum. He didn't want to go at first. But Susan convinced him. It's not about reliving it, she told him. It's about reclaiming it. So he stood in a crowded church gymnasium, next to folding chairs and bottled water, and spoke to a group of young men and women who looked a lot like him. He didn't quote statistics. He didn't preach. He just told the story. What it felt like to be treated as guilty before a question was even asked. And when he finished, a teenager in the back raised his hand. What would you have done if you didn't get the footage? He asked. Malcolm paused. I'd probably be in jail, he said honestly. Or have a record. Or worse. Because the truth doesn't always win. But it did this time, the kid said. Malcolm smiled, sad and honest. Yeah. It did. So maybe next time, it will again. The closing image. Malcolm walked home that night under a quiet sky, the kind of calm that comes not from peace, but from surviving the storm. He passed a billboard that someone had vandalized, changing the words freedom for all to justice shouldn't be this rare. He didn't take a picture. He just kept walking. Because he was still here. And that, somehow, felt like the beginning of something.